All right, here it is. Welcome to this evening's Panther-Lair Show. Make sure we got our audio set. Looks like the audio's working, the video's working, and everything is good to go. We're live here on a Tuesday night, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Appreciate everybody who joins us on the live stream. It wasn't that long ago. I mean, we just did this 30 hours ago, 31 hours ago, something like that, 31 and a half hours ago. And here we are, already coming back and jumping in for another live stream. And we had to do it because, we did a live stream yesterday afternoon, Monday afternoon, because there was news. And I actually thought... Okay, so here was the thought process. All right, going into the live stream yesterday afternoon, on Monday afternoon, after Efton Reed committed to LSU and Justin Champagnie decided he's going to go to the NBA, I thought, all right, well, this is all news. I mean, we can't wait until Tuesday night to talk about it. We got to go live right now. We have to do a live stream on Monday afternoon and discuss all these topics. And I thought, we'll do it about 20 minutes, a half hour. A lot of those sort of reaction live streams, those reaction podcasts that we do, just go about a half hour or so. It's the middle of the day. People got other things going on. They don't need to sit there for an hour or an hour and a half or anything like that, or even 45 minutes. I mean, we'll do it for a half hour and, we'll move on with our day. And then we'll come back on Tuesday night with a regular live stream podcast. We ended up going a full hour, a legit full hour. Let me look at the time there. An hour and 3 minutes, actually, and maybe a few more, maybe a little bit more than that, because we didn't have the audio on when the podcast started. So it's probably even a little bit more than an hour and 3 minutes. And when I got done with that on Monday afternoon, 2:30 in the afternoon, I was like, all right, we just did an hour podcast. People don't need 2 one-hour podcasts in a week, let alone 2 that are released back to back. You know what I mean? 2 days in a row. We don't need that. So we're just going to skip the Tuesday night podcast. This 1 hour Monday afternoon live stream is going to be plenty. We don't need another podcast on Tuesday night, 20, 30 hours from now. But then more news came up. And when more news came up, it was like, all right, well, guess we got to do another live stream. So here we are in our Tuesday night spot, our regular Tuesday evening podcast time, the live stream, like I say, on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you tend to listen to the podcast through the week and you want to be part of the conversation, you want to jump in and, join the discussion. The way to do it is to go to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, Pantherlaircom. No dashes or dots in there, just youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And you can get into the live stream. And there's already people jumping in. We see Roman showing up. Good to see you again, Roman. You haven't been there in a little while. Kevin Plaucha, one of our, you always retweet us on Twitter when we tweet about the live stream and the podcast. We appreciate that. Appreciate everybody who shows up. It's good to see guys rolling in and, joining the discussion, joining the conversation, because this is kind of, we don't really have a sports talk radio setup. You're not going to call in and be in the conversation, but you can post your comments in the live stream and we'll get to all of them. If you want to make sure that we get your comment or your question, you can, of course, become a super chatter and support the podcast a little bit, and we will make sure we get to, everything you've got to say and get all your comments and questions. The website by now, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, we got message boards where you can interact with other people all day long. We do this, podcast an hour a week, or in the case of this week, 2 hours a week. And we have these live streams going and we have these conversations, and it's all fun, but, it's just sort of an extension of the discussions we're having all day, every day at Panther-Lair.com. We do this all the time. I'm looking at the message boards right now. There's people, there are new posts showing up, new replies showing up, new threads, new discussion topics. And it's really, if you are a Pitt fan, you like to talk about Pitt sports, that's the place you need to go to join the conversation at Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you check that out. Of course, we got to give a shout out to Home Field. You know them. They just released a new set of Pitt gear. It's awesome. It's all, it's just as good, if not better, than the first set of Pitt logos and designs they rolled out. I got my Hawaii Rainbow Warriors sweatshirt on because we got to pour one out for Colt Brennan tonight, man. That's sad news about the former Hawaii quarterback passing away. And so I was like, well, I got, what home field am I going to wear tonight? I got a couple Pitt shirts, and I got this Hawaii Rainbow Warriors sweatshirt. And I'm like, you know what, man? Colt Brennan, I had a lot of fun watching him play. It was always fun to turn on those Hawaii games and see the yards and the passing all over the place. Love watching Timmy Chang. You know what I mean? Love all that stuff. And Colt Brennan was one that was he was a blast to watch. And it's sad that he passed away. So I was like, all right, we'll sport the Hawaii sweatshirt tonight. Super comfortable, looks great, and a little bit of a nod to Colt Brennan on his passing today. The guy was only 37. That's it happens more and more as you get older, but when people younger than you die, man, it hits a little bit different. You know what I mean? But again, as you get older and older, it sort of becomes more frequent because there are more of those people out there. Anyway, so rest in peace, Colt Brennan. You can get some sweet Hawaii gear at Home Field Apparel. That was a pretty callous segue there, but we're talking about Home Field, and they support us. They support the podcast and the website, so you should go check them out. Homefieldapparel.com is the website. They got great Pitt stuff and great stuff for a lot of schools. You can see they got a great Hawaii sweatshirt that I'm wearing, and their Pitt gear is it's outstanding. So you definitely should go check that out. Homefieldapparel.com. All right, those are the websites. Those are the things you should check out. Those are the little plugs we do. Those are the shout-outs that we give. And then we jump into the Pitt conversation. You know what I mean? We get into the Pitt sports talk. And, you go over the last 48 hours, right? 48, maybe 50-some hours. I forget exactly what time Efton recommitted to LSU on Sunday. It's been a lot happening for Pitt basketball. I mean, when you look at it's funny. If you look at the live stream yesterday, right, and you go back and watch that reaction podcast that we did, or you listen to it, or you read any of the things we've written or tweeted about the situation after Efton Reed, after Justin Champagnie, one of the biggest things I said was, at a very sort of basic level, they need guys to fill out this roster. They had, I counted, 9 scholarship players set to join the roster at that point, okay? And only 3 of them are guys you would classify as forwards, front court players, 4s or 5s, power forwards or centers. Setting aside things like, Will Jeffress could line up at the 4 in a small lineup or something like that. No, talking about actual 4s and 5s, you really had 3 of them. And it was Dan Oladapo, who's transferring from Oakland University, Noah Collier, who's a sophomore, and Maxim Madison, who's a sophomore. And I don't think that combination, I don't think that trio was inspiring a lot of confidence among Pitt fans, and understandably so. You don't know what Oladapo is going to do in the move to the ACC. And Collier and Madison aren't ready. They're probably not ready. They're probably not going to be ready this year. Not for a primary role, not for a prominent role, not for significant minutes. They're not going to really be ready. They're definitely not going to be ready to step into the starting lineup. And the way the roster was constructed yesterday afternoon and yesterday morning, after Justin Champagnie's announcement, the construction of the roster was that one of those 3, was going to have to play significant minutes. Well, no, out of those 3, 2 out of the 3 were going to have to play significant minutes in prominent roles. And that was a problem. And I didn't, I don't think I said during the podcast yesterday that, I don't think they're going to fill these roles. They knew they would. It was just a question of who they would fill those spots with. And so you fast forward a few hours and you get to the news on Monday night that Chris Payton, junior college player at Indian Hills Community College, had committed to Pitt. Don't know anything about him. Didn't know anything about him. Had to do a lot of research to find out things about him. And I still have some of the research up here on the second screen in the studios at Panther-Lair.com. And, we find out he's a 6'7", 215-pound forward. He averaged a double-double, 12.5 points and 10 rebounds per game, with 2.3 blocks. Shot 57% from the floor. And you watch the film. And you see the guy jumping all around. You see him blocking shots. You see him knocking down some longer shots. You see him playing in a variety of positions, 3, 4, 5, prominently 5. And while he doesn't exactly look like your typical ACC center or what you'd like an ACC center to look like, he looks like he could be a competent player in the front court in college. And now when you add him to this mix, you're not just talking about Oladapo, Collier, and Madison. You're talking about another guy who could play either one of those 2 spots, 4 or 5, in Chris Payton. And I'll say right off the bat that I think if your initial reaction is, oh, they're going to go into this season with the center either being Chris Payton or Max Madison or Dan Oladapo, I'm not very enthusiastic about that. And if that is your reaction, I don't entirely disagree. But don't just look at the size. Don't just look at Chris Payton being 6'7". You know what I mean? Don't just look at Daniel Oladapo being around there. Don't. I think you have to think a little differently about what this roster, how this roster is going to be constructed, and what this lineup might look like. I don't know. I don't know if Pitt's ever going to have a big-time 7-foot center lining up for them, or at least not for a long time. They got close with Efton Reed. They almost landed him, but they weren't able to do it. He ends up going to LSU for whatever reason. We all have our theories about that. But I think the coaches are content to build a lineup that has maybe a smaller center, that doesn't have that traditional 6'11", 5 out there, but take a smaller guy who can jump, who can rebound, who has a big wingspan, who can block shots. And by smaller, we're still talking about a guy who's maybe 6'7" or 6'8", if you can get a guy like that. I mean, John Hughley's not a 7-foot player. And I hesitate to say, and DeJuan Blair was not a 7-foot player. I mean, we all know about Blair, and we know that Blair was a freak of nature, and we know that you're not going to find another DeJuan Blair. It's going to be tough to find another guy like that. But I think you can put a lineup out there that has a smaller center and still be effective if that center can do certain things. If that center can protect the rim. If that center can rebound. If that center can finish around the basket. He doesn't have to be 7 foot to be competitive out there. And so you watch the film of Chris Payton, right? And I'm not saying he's going to be Pitt's starting center. We'll talk in a moment about who's going to be Pitt's starting center in this upcoming season. But you watch the film of Chris Payton and you see a guy, he can jump. He can dunk. I mean, that's one of the things that stands out the most to the people on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com is how athletic he looks, how good of a dunker he is, how he can just finish at the basket. And you watch the way he blocks shots. You look at this, a wingspan that's 7 foot. He might not be 7 feet tall, but he's got the wingspan of a guy who's that size. And so he's able to affect shots. He's able to make it difficult to drive in the lane. You put him under the basket with his back to the basket, and he's just watching for guys trying to drive. He can deter a lot, I think, with his size, with his length, with his ability to block shots. Is he the perfect 5 for the ACC? No. Is Pitt going to field a perfect lineup or perfect roster for the ACC? Probably not. They're going to have to some extent, make do with what they have, but also to some extent find pieces that sort of fit a certain style of play. And I think that's one thing that stands out to me when I look at Chris Payton, I look at Dan Oladapo, I look at Jamarius Burton. They've brought in a handful of guys who I think are going to be willing to get in and mix it up in the ACC and play physical and get in the face of other teams and make it a little bit more of a fight. And I can't say for certain if that's a specific intention of the coaching staff and the way they've gone about building this roster, but I think there's some truth to it. I think they want to be a little bit more like some of those Pitt teams we all used to watch 15 years ago, 18 years ago. And there are certain characteristics of those Pitt teams that I don't know if this coaching staff is ever going to be able to accomplish, not in this day and age of college basketball. There are certain things that made those teams really good that I don't know if you can do in 2021. in terms of building a roster that sticks together and grows together over the course of a few seasons. We talked a lot about this on the live stream yesterday, and I'm sure at some point over the course of the next 45 minutes we'll talk about it here too. But I don't know if you can build a we got kind of roster that's actually going to stick together for 4 or 5 years, but you can take on some of those teams, some of the attitude that those teams had. And I think when I look at Jamarius Burton, I look at Dan Oladapo, I look at Chris Payton, I look a little bit at what Femi Odekale can do. I look a little bit at what Nike Sabandi can do and the type of player he is. I think those guys have a little bit of fight in them. You know, and Xavier Johnson, I got a picture of him on the screen right there as we're talking, and he had some of that. I can still remember Xavier Johnson as a freshman in Morgantown when they lost to West Virginia, and I mean, he's running his mouth, you know, because he's not intimidated. He's not backing down from anybody. He wants to take the fight to West Virginia. He drove into West Virginia, had size out there on the court. And he was fearless. Trey McGowan's was too. They were fearless. They would take the fight. Even if it was a fight they were going to lose, they would take the fight. And I think this year's team is being built to try to take the fight. Now look, you might not think of a game last year. You know what I mean? Think of a Virginia game. Think of the Carolina game where, you know, they were overmatched. You know, they were overmatched. And they battled in those games and they fought and they kept them, you know, at various points they were relatively close, but ultimately they were overmatched. And you're going to have those games in the ACC. If you're Pitt, I don't think there are going to be a lot of times where you are the more talented team on the court. And that's okay. That happens because the more talented team doesn't always win. But if you can get a team that plays hard, plays together, minimizes its mistakes, and makes the opponent uncomfortable, you can win. You can win a lot of games that way. You can win, you know, a pretty solid amount. And I think they're trying to put together a team that'll do that. That'll punch other teams in the mouth and say, okay, you're McDonald's All-American, you're 5-star, you're this, you're that. How's it feel with my elbow in your gut? And I'm not saying they're going to play dirty or anything like that, but I think they want to build a team that has that kind of attitude, that's going to go out and fight like that. And I think they got a few guys, you know, I think the three older players they brought in. I don't know about Nate Santos. I don't know what his mentality's like, but I think the three older players, the two transfers and the JUCO player, have that mentality. I think Femi Odekale has some of that mentality. I think Nike Sabandi has some of that mentality. Like, you get enough of those kinds of guys on the court, you get enough of those kinds of guys on the roster, and you can win. Now, is the roster complete? No. There's still roster construction to be done. And the biggest thing that's left, and I would contend that maybe the only thing they have yet to add, and quite possibly the only thing they will add to the 10 guys they have slated to be on the team this year, is a center. And I imagine, you know, I think we'll see them get a transfer center. I think at some point they will land a center out of the transfer portal. I don't know who it'll be. I don't know where it'll be from. I don't know if it'll be a guy from a Power 5 conference or a mid-major conference. You need a guy, and I took some flack for sort of offhandedly or maybe inappropriately calling it a Gary McGee type, which maybe it was a bit disrespectful to Gary McGee, but I was using it almost as sort of a shorthand for a big guy who can stand under the basket, get in people's way, grab some rebounds, occasionally finish, and mostly just kind of be a big body presence out there. Because this team, again, is going to come down to the guard play. And I made this point. I talked a lot about this yesterday. I've talked a lot about this through the offseason. And as the rosters come more into shape and kind of, you know, come together more this offseason, I think I've made the point a few times that this team is really going to go as Femi Odekale and Nike Sabandi and Ithiel Horton and Jamarius Burton take it. You know, I mean, I think it starts at 1 and 2 are the drivers of this team, and then you kind of work down through, you know, with the 3 after that and the 4 after that and the 5 after that. And I think that's how this team will sort of be driven. I think that's where the points will come from. I think that's where, you know, the leadership will come from. And I think that's what's going to determine what this team does, you know, the kind of success they have. So what you really need is a 5 who can take up space around the basket. Not a guy that you're going to count on to average a double-double, but somebody who can, you know, 6 and 6, if you could get that, I think that'd be great. Provided you can get strong rebounding out of the power forward position, provided, whatever five you bring in is, you're also rotating Chris Payton into that spot. And then there's a lot of provideds here. Provided you get more, get production out of the three, with Will Jeffress taking a big step forward. And then assuming you don't have any major regression from Femi Odikali, that he builds on what he showed at the end of last season, that Nike Sabandi builds on what he showed at the end of last season, and that Ethiel Horton develops a lot of, I say a lot, but at least some consistency, and that Jamarius Burton can be a contributing player. So if you're keeping track, that's about 74 ifs I just threw in there, but that's the reality of Pitt basketball's roster this year. There's a potential for some level of success, some level of effective play, dependent on a lot of ifs. Ifs that are not necessarily without support and evidence. I think there are some things to believe in with this roster. But there's a lot that has to be proven about it. We are making a lot of assumptions because there's nobody on this roster that has a proven track record, of anything approaching a significant amount of time. But there are ways I can see this roster as it's constructed, if you add a transfer center, going out and having some success. And then, of course, the elephant in the room always is going to be John Hughley and what happens with his situation, because he changes the equation too. If you bring him in, or if he's able to come back, I shouldn't use those terms like if you bring him in or if you get him or something like that. If he's able to return to the team, and you get a transfer center, which I think they should do both. I think they should effort to get a transfer center and hope for Hughley to return. If you do that, then you've got, Peyton can play the 4 with Oladapo, or potentially have the versatility to play at the 5 if you want to get a different look out there. You can get Jeffress and maybe even Peyton at the 3, or you can get Jefferson Santos playing the 3. You can go with a 3-guard lineup with Odikali and Sabandi and maybe a Horton or a Burton playing, on the wings. You could go with a lineup that has like 4, 6, 7, or 6, 8 guys and a point guard. You realistically could do that. You're going to have some versatility in this lineup. If the cards fall into place, if things go the way, the best case scenario way, then they could win some games. You know what I mean? I think they could have some success. The difficult thing right now is there aren't going to be a lot of things that happen between now and the start of the season that are going to give you a lot of confidence. I think that's the reality. The roster is pretty much set, save for Hughley and or one other guy, probably a transfer center. And I don't imagine the transfer center is going to make anyone say, holy cow, they're going to win 20 games this year. And so it's going to be a matter of waiting. It's going to be a matter of waiting to see what the outcome actually is, what the roster actually looks like, and how it actually plays when you put them on the court. And we just wait. All right, let's see what we got as far as questions, people jumping in on the live stream. Lots of questions, and we appreciate that. Roman jumps in right off the bat. It's good to see Roman coming back. He was in one of the Roman, I think you were there at the first live stream we ever did last February, so I'm glad to see you, buddy. He asked, with all the basketball talk, asks, what's the football scholarship count at now? Do you think there'll be any more transfers or additions before fall camp? Yeah, the football scholarship count took one off today. Will Gibson, the wide receiver who's from Aliquippa, left. I think that puts them at 84 scholarships for the fall. We'll re-update our scholarship board there on Panther-Lair.com and get the current up-to-date number. I think time, will there be more transfers out? Probably. Will there be more transfers in? Possibly, I guess is what I would say to that. Let's see here. Scroll down. Through the H2P asks, if John Hughley gets cleared legally, is it a done deal that Pitt would take him back? Yeah, I think they would. I think that if they're comfortable with the situation and the way the legal situation is resolved, I think Pitt would take him back. I think it's I don't want to say it's a no-brainer because there's probably more elements to it than I'm aware of or than you're aware of, but I would say, yeah, if Pitt is able to or if John Hughley's legal situation is resolved to Pitt's satisfaction, I think they take him back. Josh Haskins says, I do like the guys they've added. I just worry the roster is full of very solid role players and nobody was ready to be the man and can be the consistent scorer. Maybe Femi or Nike can be. Yeah, Josh, I mean, I think you seem like a pretty positive guy as far as this goes, that you're optimistic about the guys that they have. Who could be the leading scorer? I think Femi Odikali is going to be counted on to be a driving force for this team. I think. So the thing about Femi is it's a small sample size from last season, but I think when you look at what he was able to do when he got an opportunity, I think he made the most of his opportunity whenever he got one. I think he did what he could with the opportunities that he got. And when he went into the starting lineup at the end of the season, I think he played pretty well. I think he ran the offense pretty well. I think he was able to score pretty well. I think he was able to facilitate pretty well. And so, yeah, I think he's ready for the big time to be an ACC point guard. I'm bullish on Nike Sabandi. I think it took him a while to get settled in. And even at the end of the season, after he put in a couple of good games, you look back and it's sort of the same situation as Odikali where he wasn't getting all the opportunities. You know what I mean? He wasn't getting as much playing time as maybe he deserved. And so I think both of those guys, when you get more playing time, you get more, time on the court, you get more, you just get more opportunity, more comfort level. I think you can expect a high level production out of them. There's a couple of guys I'm really curious about. I mean, pretty much all of them, I guess. But Ethiel Horton, after another year, he had a year where he sat out, and then a year of actually playing. I would have. I'm really interested to see what kind of consistency he can develop. I'm also, Will Jeffress is the guy I'm probably going to keep talking about throughout the offseason. I don't know if he's going to be the leading scorer. I don't know if he's going to average double-digit points, but I do think there will be at least 5 games where he makes a play that helps Pitt win. You know what I mean? A play late in the game, or he facilitates the offense. He keeps the offense moving. I feel like he's got the ability to be a guy who can really do kind of everything. He can knock down some shots. He can slash. He can defend. He can rebound. He just has a feel for the game. I think he's one of the better athletes on the team. And he's got really good basketball IQ. I mean, there's a reason he was highly coveted as a recruit. And we didn't see it every game last season. He didn't get an opportunity in every game last season. And he didn't make the most of every opportunity he did get. But there were points where he would do something and you would say, "Whoa, well, that was really interesting. You just moved through that last sequence with some pretty high level play." And I'm really interested to see if he ends up in the starting lineup, which is what my assumption is, that he'll end up as the starting 3 on this team. I'm really interested to see where he is in that first non-conference game and where he is as the season progresses. Getting a full 10 non-conference games or whatever it is that they might play, I think will be huge for a guy like him. It'll be huge for this whole team, to be honest with you. And that's one thing that we probably don't talk about enough is they only played 5 non-conference games last year. When you look at last season and the development time that an Odikali should have gotten, or Nike Sabandi, or Ethiel Horton getting settled into actually playing on the court, or Will Jeffress, or any of these guys, I mean, they were limited in what they could do in the off-season training. You know what I mean? When you go through the summer, I think they were limited in what they were able to do and into the early fall. And then they go in and they only have 5 non-conference games before they're jumping into the ACC. And I think that's probably underrated when we talk about things that affected how the team did and how the players individually developed over the course of the season. I think we probably don't talk about that as much as we should. And so give them a full offseason. Give Will Jeffress a full year of offseason college conditioning and training. Give Femi Odikali a full year of that. Give Ethiel Horton another full year of settling in. Give Nike Sabandi a full year where he knows he's going to play this year and everything's set and he's going to be a big part of this. And then give those guys a full non-conference schedule. I'll be interested to see how they look. I feel like they might make some real progress. Let's see here. RJ Seaman38 supporting the podcast as a super chatter, and we really appreciate that. It says, what has Jeff Capel done to make sure the drama does not overtake the program again? It's an important question, in my opinion. I don't know. I don't know what Capel has done. I mean, you try to manage a locker room as best you can. There are things that happen outside of your control. A lot of things on a lot of different levels, a lot of different angles and elements that are outside of your control that can affect the culture in your locker room, the culture in your program. And so as a head coach, I mean, I think you do whatever you can to try to manage the roster, manage the players, manage egos and all those kinds of things. But, there's only so much. And sometimes things are going to go south on you. Not necessarily, in your control. I mean, there are situations where the locker room is, culture is toxic because of the head coach or due to the head coach's actions or his approach. But that's not always the case. And a lot of times there can be outside factors that impact things. And that's, that I don't know what you can do to prevent that if it's going to happen. I guess the best you can do is try to foster as positive of an environment as you can, a family environment as much as you can. This is what I mean, though. I think it's tough. It's tough with the way basketball is right now in 2021. I think it's tough to build a family in your locker room. Guys aren't going to stick around. And I mean, I'm going to go down this path again on this rant that the next couple years of college basketball is going to be very interesting to see how the sport develops. And if future off seasons, future springs look like this one did. And I don't know if it's going to be as extreme as this one has been. I don't know if there are going to be 1,500 guys in the transfer portal again. But as long as there's the opportunity to transfer somewhere for free and not have to sit out a year and just go somewhere and play, I think you're going to have a lot of guys bailing. Because a lot of guys are going to say, I'm not getting the minutes I want to get. I'm not being used the way I want to be used. I'm not, playing how I want to play. I'm not being featured. I'm not getting the exposure I want to get. And so I'm going to go work somewhere else. And, I think coaches can sit guys down for hours every day and say, listen, here's where you need to get better. Here's what you need to do. We will help you get better. We will help you become the player you want to become. You got to trust us. You got to do what we're asking you to do. You put in that work, I promise you will get there. And they can hammer that message into these kids' heads over and over and over again. But as soon as they walk out the door of that office, their phone's blown up with text messages and calls and emails and DMs saying, hey, why aren't you playing more? Why aren't you getting more minutes? Why is he taking all the shots? Why aren't you taking more shots? Why aren't they passing to you? Why are you passing? And all this stuff. Why isn't coach playing you more? And eventually, I think for a lot of these kids, do you want the voice that says, hey, you're not working hard enough, you got to work harder to get where you want to be? Or do you want the voice that says, you're good enough, you should be doing more than you are right now? I think which way it goes for a lot of those kids, and I think that's why there are 1,500 players in the transfer portal this offseason. There's not 1,500 spots in the Power 5 schools. You know what I mean? There's not 1,500 spots at high major and mid-major schools that are open right now. But all these kids want to go somewhere where they think they're going to be the man. And they're going to be used the way they want to be used. And so, what this does is it makes it very difficult, I think, for a coach to sort of project what his roster is going to be like 2 years down the road, even. And I don't know if you're going to be turning over your roster every offseason, but maybe every two. Because you can't rely on it. You recruit a guard one year, and you recruit another guard the next year, and that second year, one of those guys is going to be playing a lot, and the other one's not. And the one who's not probably won't be there in year 3. So now you're turning that over again. You're turning that spot over again. And when you have that kind of movement, when you have guys not sticking around more than a year or two, it's hard to build that family setting in the locker room. It's hard to build that kind of connection. It's hard to have we got. That wasn't just the saying back then. You know what I mean? That ended up on T-shirts and ended up on the title of Mike Lowenstein's great book. You should find it if you haven't read it. But it didn't start out as a t-shirt slogan. It was a real thing that really meant something to the guys in that locker room. I don't know if you could have that these days. I think it's really hard to build that. What does Jeff Capel do to create it? I mean, he does everything he can to foster it. But then the guys leave his office, they leave their locker room, and the rest of their lives happen. And that might not necessarily, be, conducive to creating that sort of family vibe and creating something that'll last over time. Josh Newark, a regular guy on the live stream, we appreciate him, says, maybe a silly question. You talk about Pitt needing to find their tough identity similar to the Howland and Dixon era. Does Pitt need to play a Virginia offense where the goal is to win dirty scraps in the 58-54 point range, run long offensive sets, play sound defense, and hope to scrap out close wins? I don't know if it needs to be exactly like that. I do think, and I said this a lot last year, over the course of the last season, when they had games where they were close or when they had games when they were winning, the key to their success last season, aside from Justin Champagnie being really good, they were at their best when they were playing really tough defense and they were rebounding. And they were winning rebounding battles, and they were holding the opponent under 40%. They were playing not Jamie Dixon basketball because their offense wasn't operating like that, but they were playing a version of what Dixon wanted, which was defense and rebounding. Because ultimately, if you've watched these live streams before, you listen to these podcasts before, it ultimately, you've heard me say this a bunch of times. Your offense is going to come and go. Shots are going to fall, or maybe they're not. So, unless you have that superb, high-end offensive team. And I don't think Pitt has that, and they're probably not going to have that. They're going to continue to have teams where some nights the shots fall and some nights they don't. And that's the way it is for a majority of teams. You can't always control that. You don't always know when those off nights are going to come, that the shots aren't going to fall. But what you can control is your effort on defense and your effort on the glass. And if you do those things, if you play tough defense, if you rebound, you will give yourself a chance to win every night, or at least be in the game and contend. And that has to be the focus. And I think that's what they want to focus on here. I think they want to be that tough physical team that plays good defense and rebounds. And does it mean it needs to be a 58-54 game? I don't know. 72-71 works. You only need one more than the other guy. You only need to make one more basket, So whether, whatever the scoring range ends up being, you've got to win the battle on defense and you've got to win the battle on the glass. If you do that, you'll have a chance to win. Dan Juby says, I'm sure you pay better attention to the coaching staff than me. So what are your thoughts on the B-ball assistant coaches doing a nice job? Expect any changes? I don't know what, I don't know. I don't know about the staff. I mean, this question gets asked all the time. I think it was asked during the live stream yesterday, Dan, and I think it's been asked on previous live streams. And I don't really have a good answer. I don't know. I'm not in the practices. Recruiting is more of a group effort in basketball than it is in football. You still have guys who are the point man. Milan Brown is the point man here. Jason Capel is the point man there. Tim O'Toole is the point man here. But it's still more of a group effort than in football, where you really do separate it out. Guys have geographic areas, and then the position coach comes in and all that stuff. So it's tougher to tell in that regard. It's a results-oriented business, and the results obviously are not great. They haven't gotten that 5-star big-time kid, although they got a couple 4-stars in last year's class, and obviously did a good job finding Femi Odikale and did a good job finding Justin Champagnie. But the results on the court haven't been great, despite improving the conference winning percentage every season over the last 3 years. It's results-oriented, and the results don't necessarily speak favorably of most of those guys. But there's also something to be said for the process, and the process is something that's harder for those of us on the outside to see, particularly if the results don't follow. But if Jeff Capel's comfortable with the process and how his assistants have approached the process and how the team has progressed with those assistants, we can look at it and say, well, this guy doesn't play well. They haven't developed this guy and this and that. But we don't really know what it's impossible to say what some of these players would be without the coaching from these coaches. You know what I mean? What would they do with coaching from other coaches? I've heard guys say they're shocked by what Xavier Johnson turned into, the type of player he became, that it was completely different from what he was in high school, and much better, much more controlled, and much more part of a team, and much more part of an offense than he was previously. And I think that's a credit to the Pitt coaches. Justin Champagnie played himself into a guy who could leave after 2 years and seriously consider himself an NBA draft pick. I don't know if he's going to get drafted. Depending on the mock draft you look at, it might be a surprise if he gets drafted. But that's a credit to the coaching staff's development, So there's that unseen side of it, the process side of it. And that's up to Jeff Capel to decide if his guys have done a good enough job in his view. Let's see here. H2P says the key to the season, as always, is going to be what they can get out of their point guard and shooting guard. This needs to become Nike's team somehow. I think it needs to become Femi Odekale's team. I think he needs to step into a leadership role as a sophomore. A guy who's going to have his first full season as a starting point guard. He's got to be the man, I think. Nike Sabandi has to be a potent scoring threat. Not a great shooter, but a guy who has knocked down a lot of threes in his career. Also, while kind of slashing and just being sort of a tough guy guard. And Ethiel Horton needs to come on. You know what I mean? He needs to be a consistent outside shooting threat. If Nate Santos is ready to play, he needs to be a consistent outside shooting threat too. Because that's probably one area where I'm not really sure about on this team. I need to see somebody step up as a three-point shooter. And whether that's whether that's Horton, whether it's Santos, whether Sabandi and Odekale develop a little bit in that regard. I mean, somebody needs to be a threat from outside just to loosen things up so that particularly Odekale and Sabandi can drive a little bit more and either kick it out to a shooter or dump it underneath. But they need somebody to show up as the three-point shooter. RJC man follows up, says Hughley, if he comes back, represents drama, and once again Jeff Capel will look weak. Need to know all the details, but clearly Hughley made bad decisions. Sure, he did. That doesn't necessarily mean that he should never get another opportunity to play basketball for the University of Pittsburgh. If the legal situation resolves itself to the satisfaction of Jeff Capel, to the satisfaction of Heather Lyke, to the satisfaction of whoever at Pitt needs to make those decisions, then he should come back. You know what I mean? Capel will have to make that decision on whether or not he feels like John Hughley can fit in with what they're trying to do. From everything I gather, they feel like he will. They feel like he can fit back in, provided his situation gets resolved. I don't know if they have any real indication on which direction that's headed because that's pretty far out of their reach. I think they had a sense that Justin Champagnie probably wasn't coming back. I think for the past few weeks, I think it probably started heading in that direction for the coaching staff, and I think that's why you saw Chris Payton become more of a priority target. From all accounts, it sounds like they really sort of picked it up in the last few weeks in their recruitment of him. And so I think that's probably why, because they started to get the feeling that Champagnie was going, and once it became official, I think they said, let's go, and Chris Payton was all about it. So, but they don't seem to have, I don't think they probably don't have the same sense when it comes to Hughley, one way or the other of which way it's going. But I think, again, if the legal situation is resolved, I think they'll want him back on the team. Let's see. Anthony Tennyson says, I think Nike Sabandi and Will Jeffress and Ethiel Horton will move the needle this season, and I think Noah Collier is my sleeper this year. I don't know what Noah Collier is going to do. I think he's a good athlete. I don't think he's ready for a starting role, certainly. I don't know if he's ready for prominent minutes. With Dan Oladapo and Chris Payton, I'm not sure they would need him to play prominent minutes, but I think you could see him on the court for a few minutes a game, and maybe he shows some flash. And again, this is the kind of guy where get in the non-conference, play 10 non-conference games where you get some opportunities in some of those games, ideally to get a guy like Collier some quality minutes in there, or Madison for that matter. And maybe you find out, this guy can do a little bit. Maybe he gets a little comfortable on the court and he can help you a little bit more when he gets to the ACC. I think if they get a center and they get Hughley back, then Oladapo and Payton are going to take the bulk of the minutes at the 4, and it's probably not going to leave a lot of opportunity for Noah Collier. But he could earn himself some opportunities in the non-conference. And if they either miss on a transfer center or John Hughley can't come back, then, I think you probably open up some more opportunities for a guy like Collier, because a guy like Peyton or maybe even Oladapo is a smaller 5, might have to play some center minutes. So it's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of versatility in this lineup, I think. Guys who can play some different positions, and I think they will move them around and try them at different positions, try different lineups, try different rotations, and see what works. Let's see here. Austin Libro, why is it so hard to get a center? Who else can offer 30-plus minutes a game in a Power 5 conference? That has to interest somebody. Yeah, you would think so. I don't know if it's just the guys that they've been trying to get, or they can't find the right guys who really fit, who also want to come here. I don't know what it is. You would think you would be able to find a transfer, who could come in and step in and play right now, because that's what Pitt does have to offer. Pitt has, like you said, 30 minutes a game to offer. You should be able to find a center. There's a ton of guys in the transfer portal who are 6'10". Go find one of those guys. You can. You should be able to. And convince them to come here, because you've got a lot to offer. S-Max says, are there any concerns about Jamarius Burton's eligibility? Yeah, it's one thing that we'll have to keep an eye on. With the fact that Burton already transferred once, going from Wichita State to Texas Tech, there's a little bit of a concern that he might not be able to play this year. They'll have to put in for a waiver. He doesn't get the free one-time transfer, where you can transfer without sitting out, because he already transferred once and didn't sit out when he went from Wichita State to Texas Tech. I would guess that there are some extenuating circumstances. Obviously, he left Wichita State in the midst of something of an exodus 2 years ago, or last year, I guess it was, last spring. There was like 6 guys who left Wichita State and all transferred out. Burton was one of them. And I don't know if it was really public at that point, but clearly it's, we've all found out exactly what was going on at Wichita State, and it was kind of a toxic environment. So he leaves that situation and goes to Texas Tech. He's there for a year, and Chris Beard leaves, right? And so you've got, I think you have a unique situation where the NCAA might make it tougher to give out waivers this year, but Burton would seem like a good candidate to qualify, given trying to get away from the Greg Marshall situation and then having his coach leave at Texas Tech. So we'll have to keep an eye on that situation. I'm inclined to think that he will get his waiver. I think Pitt expects him to get his waiver, but we will have to obviously keep an eye on that situation. John Christofich, sorry if I mispronounced that, says the way Virginia plays basketball is boring. Yeah, but you know what, John? Winning is not boring. And if you can win by playing that way, then it's worth it. Austin Libro says, if John Hughley comes back, call me crazy, but we will be one big man transfer and another wing away from being dangerous. Our backcourt is legit. Yeah, so if the backcourt is legit, and I tend to agree with you, Austin, I'm bullish on these guys. I think Odikali can play. I think Sabani can play. I think if Horton can become consistent, Burton will be a nice piece to add in there. I think the backcourt is legit. And I don't even know if another wing is a necessity. I really think the only other thing they need to add to this roster is a transfer center. I think if they get that, even without John Hughley, they'll have 11 scholarship players. And I think that's all they need right now. And they're going to be a little bit thin in the front court. I don't think there's any question about it, but I think they'll be okay with the focus, again, being on the backcourt. If they could get a transfer center and get Hughley back, you got 12 scholarship guys, which is plenty. I don't even think if I'm Jeff Capel, I don't even know if I'm trying to fill all 13 right now. I think I would want to go, I think I would want to keep at least one scholarship in my pocket, if not 2, to have to use on that 2022 recruiting class, because I think they're in on a lot of guys there, and I think they want to try and stock up there, maybe even more so than going heavy on the transfer portal again next year. So, Hughley and a transfer big man, I think they'll be all right. I think they'll feel comfortable with the roster they have. I think they'll be set there, and I think it could be effective. Again, if you and I are right, Austin, that this backcourt is legit, then I think they can win some games. I don't know how many that's going to be. I don't know how many they're going to win, or how far they're going to go, but I think they can be a competitive team. And we'll see. And if all those guys, sort of take a step in the right direction, not a giant leap, but a step in the right direction, then yeah, I think they can win some games. Josh Newark with an interesting question: should Jeff Capel have worked harder to keep Terrell Brown around? It seemed like both sides were looking for a fresh start, but I always thought Brown had potential, though he was so inconsistent. Yeah, I mean, Terrell Brown would show you these flashes where you'd be like, wow, that's an NBA player. You know what I mean? And if not an NBA player, that's an all-conference player. That's a guy who could, average a double-double in the ACC, or average 10 and 9 or something like that. He would show you those flashes. And he would offset those flashes with the majority of the time where he did not look like an all-conference player, where he did not look like a guy who can average 10 and 9. He looked like a guy who should get 10 or fewer minutes because he just didn't seem to care. He didn't seem to have all that much dedication on the court. He didn't seem to really have a lot of drive or motivation. He didn't look like, a lot of the time, he didn't look like he wanted to be there. And I don't think Capel ever expected Brown to come back. I don't know if he was surprised that Terrell Brown decided to transfer and go to another school, but I don't think he ever expected Terrell Brown to be back. And I don't think Terrell Brown ever decided to come back. Where did he end up going? Like San Diego or Pepperdine, or not Pepperdine, San Diego, someplace like beautiful weather. You know what I mean? Like someplace pretty pleasant to play your final year of college basketball. Maybe a little bit less pressure than you have in the ACC, but I don't know. I think they got what they were going to get out of Terrell Brown. I think they knew what they were going to get out of Terrell Brown. Maybe you could ask that same question about Abdul Kareem Coulibaly. Should they have worked harder to keep him around? I don't know. I would think you could find a guy roughly equivalent to what those guys produced in the portal. I would think. Maybe not the two of them combined, but find one who's roughly equal to what Coulibaly did last year. One who's roughly equal to what Terrell Brown did last year. I think you could find someone who could do that and maybe not have sort of the pre-existing conditions that you had with guys that were already on the roster. And I don't know the details of, quite frankly, of either one of their decisions to leave. I don't know the details of why Coulibaly decided to transfer. I think Brown was looking for a fresh start, somewhere to play his final year of college basketball. I think Pitt was ready to move on in that situation as well. And Coulibaly, I think, wanted something different, apparently. But there are a lot of centers out there. You don't have to get a guy who's going to be all conference. You don't have to get a guy who's going to average a double-double. You should get a guy who, like I say, can be a big body in there. Take up space under the basket and give your guards some protection, I guess. All right, H2P, we'll give you the last question here. Has there been any discussion within the Pitt program on how to take advantage of the upcoming name, image, likeness opportunities? I see name, image, likeness as an opportunity for Pitt operating in a large market to position themselves well in recruiting. Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I don't know how that whole situation is going to play out. I mean, I don't know if I would even agree with your characterization of Pittsburgh as a large market, particularly when it comes to marketing of college basketball players in Pittsburgh. I don't know if that's really going to resonate. I think they might have to get back to, 2008, 2009 levels and have a player like DeJuan Blair, to really get someone who could be marketed at a high level that makes an impact. I think, some guys will be able to get a few bucks out of it. I don't think it's going to be a big swing. I don't think it's going to be a major game changer. I don't think it's going to shift the situation for Pitt all that much. That's just sort of my guess. As far as what Pitt has done, the football program signed a link with this guy, Jeremy Darlow, who's all about athletes creating their own brands or something. Claims it doesn't have anything to do with name, image, likeness, but it's funny that as the NCAA is taken on this name, image, likeness situation. This guy's getting signed by a lot of schools, but it doesn't have anything to do with that. It's about creating your brand for after college. Okay. A brand. What do you like? Here's your brand. Your brand is you're a college basketball player, and you play at either a school where the boosters are willing to give you a lot of money for marketing, or at a school where they're not. You know, I mean, that's honestly how I see it. I might be naive. I might be missing more of the nuances of the situation. But I don't know. I don't know how that whole thing's going to work. I don't know how they're going to monitor it. I don't know how it's really going to play out for the vast majority of sports, the vast majority of teams. You know what I mean? The vast majority of college players and college student athletes across the country. You know, it's not, we're not in Tuscaloosa. We're not in Columbus. We're not in Austin, you know? I don't know. I don't know what that, and you know what? Neither is Georgia Tech, and neither is Minnesota, and neither is Colorado, and neither is Utah. Utah and Salt Lake City, they might have some opportunities there. But I mean, you understand what I'm saying. I don't know how significant, I don't know how it's going to work. All right, I said that was the last question, but Michael B just jumped in. He's a super chatter, so I you know, we gotta always get to the super chatter. Michael B, it's good to see you tonight, buddy. We'll give you the last question of the evening. Says, sorry I'm late, Chris. Yeah, man, you're cutting it close. There's only a few minutes left. Not sure if you answered this, but do you feel Jeff Capel is starting to be on the hot seat? What's your expectations for next season? My expectations, I don't know what my expectations are for next season, because so much of what next season might be is dependent on guys making certain amounts of progress. You know what I mean? And it depends on making assumptions about what Femi Odikale is going to be, making assumptions about what Nike Sabandi is going to be, making assumptions about what these transfers and this JUCO player are going to be. And that's hard to do. You know what I mean? So I don't know where you set the expectations for next season until you find out how these guys have progressed. And then the expectations will be based on what they look like and how they've improved and how they've developed. Is Jeff Capel on the hot seat? I don't know. I would say probably not, but I don't know. That's something Heather Lyke has to decide, and it's something she'll decide based on more than just the record. And I know we look at it and we see the record, and we see this in recruiting or that in recruiting, and we make assumptions. But I mean, Heather Lyke's going to look at the whole state of the program. Heather Lyke knows more than you and I do about where the program was when Jeff Capel stepped in. We can all sit back and say the program was a mess. It was a rubble, and it was a disaster. But Heather Lyke saw it up close. She knows how bad the situation was. And so she set her own expectations on what it should take to get the program back, on what it should take for Capel to improve the program, or where realistically the program should go with him as the head coach. And now she has to look at the last 3 years and say, where has it gotten? And after this season, she has to look at 4 years and say, where has it gotten? How has it improved? How's it been built? Has he been building it? And how has he done in that process? And then she'll decide then if he's on the hot seat. I would say right now he's not on the hot seat. I would say at the end of this next season, maybe there's a possibility he gets on the hot seat. But I would say he's not on the hot seat right now. All right, I think that's good for us to wrap it up. Make sure you go check out homefieldapparel.com. I got the Sweet Hawaii sweatshirt on. They got great Pitt gear. You want to check that out, homefieldapparel.com. They got new Pitt gear out too. It's awesome. You gotta dig that. And Panther-Lair.com is the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Most comprehensive source, Pitt Sports News, football, basketball, recruiting. Go check it all out. Listen, before you leave the live stream too, subscribe to us on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can get notifications, and we will let you know when we are going live for like a live stream like yesterday. We fired it up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. If you subscribe to the Panther-Lair.com YouTube channel, you will know right off the bat. You will get a notification. You'll know, oh, they're going live. They scheduled a live stream for 1 o'clock. Cool. I'm going to tune in then. So make sure you do that. We appreciate everybody who hits the like button on the live stream. That's cool too. But also get out there and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That would be awesome as well. Thanks for everybody who joined in on the live stream. Thanks for everybody who listened to the podcast through the week. Of course, you can come and join the discussion on the live stream, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com every Tuesday night at 8:30. We're not going to have a live stream next Tuesday night. So I'm going to say that right quick. We won't have a live stream next Tuesday night. gonna take a little vacation. So we'll talk to you in 2 weeks. But listen, thanks again for joining. I really appreciate it. Appreciate everybody who comes into the live stream, everybody who listens to the podcast. Have a great rest of the night. Have a great rest of the week, great weekend, and we'll talk to you in a little bit. But we can always be on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. All right, have a good one.